Good evening. After that preamble, let's get started. We are on the bottom of Pei Ches Amud Aleph at the two dots. Today's daf is really, what is today's daf? Pei Tes? Yeah. So we'll be learning most of Pei Tes. We'll be learning until about halfway down. We have a lot of ground to cover, mostly not a difficult Gemara. So let's get started. We're 10 lines from the bottom at the two dots on Pei Ches Amud Aleph. And here we're talking about the din of Zakein Mamre. And now the Gemara is going to nuance still more, as Gemaras do, what is going on with this difference between the psak of the Zakein Mamre and the psak of the Bezdin Agadol, the Sanhedrin. So in the Lishkas Agazis, says the Gemara Gimel Batedinin, Amar of Kahana, who Omer, if he, the Zakein Mamre, says mi pi hashmua, he says, I'm not making this up. I have a tradition. I have a Rebbe. I have a Shmua. The Hain Omer mi pi hashmua, and they, the Lishkas Agazis, the Sanhedrin, also says, we too have our own Masorah. Eino Nerag. That's not grounds for murder, for chenek. Why? Because we have our own Masorahs. I'm allowed to have a Masorah. That's how a Das Yachid works. I'm allowed to have a Masorah. Also, hu Omer kach hu be'enai. Let's say it's a judgment call. I think this should be the psak, right? You're writing your own shilas and shuvas. The shilas never been asked before. Somebody asked you, you react. I think the din should be this way. The hain and the lishkas gazis, they say the same. Omrim kachu be'enenu, eno nerag. Level playing field. If we're level playing field, you can't kill me as a zakin mamre.
You're on Shabbos, so it must have happened a bunch of times. It probably never happened.
What?
There's nothing left.
Oh no. So let's get the third case. Well, the fourth case actually.
If this is the way I've this is the way I've it doesn't work.
But we'll see in a minute that there's one case where first of all, this sheet of Rav Kahana is subject to a machlokas that we'll see in a minute. But even without that, even Rav Kahana would agree that there's a time where there will be an imbalance. Let's keep reading. The kol shekain who omer mi pi hashmua. If he has a stronger claim, he says, "I have a Rebbe, my Rebbe paskin this way." The hein omer, the Lishkas Agazi says, "Kachu be'einenu eino nag pasha." That's a kol shekain, right? However, when will the Zakein Mamre be killed? An sheyomar kachu be'enai. He says, "This is my feel. I don't have a Masorah. This is what I think the psak should be." The hein omer pi hashmua. Then he gets killed because now you're just foaming at the mouth. The Sanhedrin says all of our Rabbeim held whatever line they said. Fine. Well, then we understand why there's Zakein Mamre. Teda, you should know. Sharei lo hargu es Akavya ben Mahalalel. What did Akavi ben Mahalalel do? 4 lines from the bottom of the page in Rashi. Rashi dibra maschil. Akavi ben Mahalalel. Nechlak al chachamim b'lishkas hagalos b'dal dvarim shlech. Let's not even get into the details. Why was he not chayiv chenek as a Zakein Mamre? Because it wasn't done in a way where he had a claim that was not on a level playing field. He wasn't saying, this is how I feel, and they were saying, we have mi pi hashmua. So therefore, he wasn't killed. V'haraya, the Rav Kahana is right. And says the Gemara, wait 1 second. The Rebbe Lazar Omer, no. Afilu hu Omer mi pi hashmua. Even if he has a Masorah, v'hein omrim kachu be'einenu. And Sanhedrin and Lishkas Agazis says, we don't have a Masorah. This is how we feel. Still Nerag. Still. Kedei shelo yarbu machlokos beYisrael. Yikes. That is a wide scope. Do we say, like Rav Kahana, that the only time that a Zakein Mamre is killed is in this super narrow sliver of psak, that the Zakein Mamre says, I have no Masorah, but I have a Svara, and Bezdin says, you're a fool, we have a Masorah. Okay, it's an imbalance. Says Rabbi Lazar, no, I don't care what the level playing. There doesn't need to be a level playing field. In order to avoid machlokas, if the Bezdin Agadol paskins X mi pi hashmua or not mi pi hashmua, and the Zakein Mamre argues mi pi hashmua or not mi pi hashmua, he's a Zakein Mamre and he gets chenek. So huge machlokas into the applicability of the din of Zakein Mamre.
Or because otherwise, I mean, if somebody just makes a mistake.
No. There's no mistakes to be made here because the process that our Mishnah delineated on Shabbos is you go to the Bezdin by Harabais, and then after that you go to the one by the. There's no question what the Sanhedrin said. You go home and you start behaving like the opposite of their psak. You start paskening against your chayv misa.
I mean, at that point, it's merit.
That's what Zakein Mamre is. That's what Zakein Mamre is. You're going against the system. You're anti-establishment. Beam Tomar, if that's true, says the Gemara, if Rebbe Lazar, if you're right, what about the person we just learned about? Mipnei malo hargu es Akavi ben Mahalalel. We just learned by Rav Kahana that Akavi ben Mahalalel wasn't killed as a Zakin Mamre because he was in the right space. He was Be'enai and they were Bishmua, whatever the case may be. Other way around. He was Bishmua, they were Be'enai. That makes sense. It says the Gemara, the reason why is because Akavi ben Mahalalel didn't walk around and give shiur and say, look, guys, I was on Har Bayis yesterday, had a great time there, but I'm poskening against them. He didn't do that. He lived his life. He didn't get up and give shiur and say, I disagree with Sanhedrin, and therefore he wasn't killed. Let's analyze. Tanan, we have a Mishnah. Our Mishnah. Tanan, we see Kach darashti v'kach darshu chaverai. This is what the potential Zakin Mamre would say in Bezdin. This was my drasha. This was how my friends were doresh. Kach lamati v'kach lamdu chaverai. My love, isn't this case in our Mishnah? The Hava Omar, the Zakin Mamre said mi pi Shmua, v'heim omrim kachu be'einenu. And therefore, maybe Rebbe Lazar was correct and Rav Kahana was wrong, because here we see the Zaken Mamre had a stronger claim. He was Mipi Shmua, and Bezdin had a weaker claim of Be'enein. It was just what we thought. Lo, says the Gemara, no. Why would you ever learn it that way? Who Omer Kachu Be'enai? The Zaken Mamre was the one who had a weaker svar. He said, this is just what I think. The Heim Omer, the Sanhedrin said Mipi Shmua. So no raya. Toshma, let's try again. And here we're going to see that there's some teeth and merit to the sheet of Rebbe Lazar, seemingly even Allah Chalamaisa. Well, we don't have a base of Mikdash. But the Gemara here seems to say that we pass like Rebbe Lazar. How so? There were three things that Ze'ira told me, says Rabbi Shaya, that he heard from the greats of Yerushalayim. Number one, Baal shemachal al kinuyo machal. We know that by the world of Sota, if a husband is makana es ishto, he warns his wife, you are not allowed to be miyached with this person. That's the beginning of the process of Sota. If a husband rescinds that warning, the warning is thereby rescinded. That was the first of three things that he heard from Ze'ira. Number two, top of Peches Midbeis, Ben Sora Rumore Sheratu Avi V'imo Limcholo Mochlen Lo. Let's say the parents decide, Zis, yes, you violated every Isser, but we don't want you to die. Mechila. Then we don't go through it, Ben Sora or Mora. And lastly, Zakein Mamre Sharatu Beistino Limchalo Mochlano. That if the Bezdin says we don't want to kill this guy, then they won't kill him. And look at the pushback. Uchshebasi Eitzel Chaverai Shebedarom. And when Rabbi Yoshia got down to the south and he was with his friends and they were talking and learning, so they said Al Shnaim Hoduli, they agreed to the first two. But Al Zakein Mamre Lo Hoduli. And here's the reason why. They said that a Sanhedrin cannot be mochel on a Zakein Mamre. Why? Kidei shelo yirbu machlokos b'Yisrael tiyuvta. We pass on like Rabbi Lazar. And the Gemara therefore says that we are never allowed to be mochel on a Zakein Mamre. And even if the Zakein Mamre has a Mesorah, and the Bezdin is just reacting from the Kishkas, he is put to death as a Zakein Mamre. End of sugya number one. Well, kind of. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihye b'baro. Tanya, 6 lines down, Peches Midbeis. Amar Rabbi Yossi, mitchila, back in the day, lo hayu marben machlokos b'Yisrael. There really wasn't a lot of machlokas back in the day. Now everyone and their brother has a psak on everything. Says the Gemara, why not? Because it's when the Sanhedrin was in place, they were the final say. Not only that, surrounding them, they had 2 batidin of 23. One at the outskirts of the Beis Hamikdash by Har Habayis, like we saw in our Mishnah. Petach Tikva had one, Tel Aviv had one, Rehovot had one, but everybody had their own Beis Din. And it was like the system that Yisro helped Moshe set up. If the small court doesn't know, they bump it up to the next court. No? Shaila had to be asked. They'd go to the CRC. If the CRC knew the answer, they would say the answer. Then they'd go to the next one. They'd go to the Aguda. If the Aguda knew the answer, great. Then they kick things up to the next court. And they go to the Bezdin by Har Bayis. If they knew the answer, great. Then they kick up to yet another level. And what do? They say, "V'omer kach darashti v'kach darshu chavera kach lemati v'kach limdu chavera." This is what I think says the zaken mamre, the potential zaken mamre. This is what the bezdin thinks. Im shamu, if they know the answer, omer lehem v'im lav elu ve'elu b'ain lelishkas hagazis. Then all of them go, meaning the dayanim too. The dayanim also go to the next level of bezdin. They go to the azara. Shesham Yoshvin, where this is actually talking about the lishkas hagazis, the Sanhedrin Hagdola. Sheshem Yoshim Tamid Shel Shachar Tamid Shel Ben Arbaim. They're there for all of the hours of the day, from the morning Tamid to the afternoon Tamid. Ubeshabasos v'yamim tovim Yoshvim b'chel. They would sit outside the chel, between the Sorig and the Mikdash. That's where they would sit. Nishal Hashela b'fneim. A question was asked in front of them. Im shamu amrulem. If the Sanhedrin Agadol knew the answer to the question, they would give the answer. V'im lav omdin laminyan. They would vote. They would say, I think the psak in this case should be X. You think the psak should be Y. And it should be a democratic rule. Rabu hametamin lantomu. If the majority of the people of the dayanim of the lishkas hagazos of the Sanhedrin would vote that the case was a case of tuma or is or whatever the case may be, so be it. Rabu hametarin taru. So when did machlokes start? Mishay Rabu talmidei Shammai v'Hillel shelo shimshu kol tzorchan. They did not do enough shimush of their rabbeim. This is like the biggest musar ever. You can't even talk in halacha if you don't have a Rebbe. Don't even bother. And if your shimush isn't enough, then you really should not be answering any shilas at all. There's too much nuance. There's too many shachs and tazes. Rav Hershel Schachter told us this story. He said, you need to know every shach and every taz in your day if you're going to be a posek. And he told us, I've shared this here before, this whole shaila. A company used a whole cheese run for Pesach. I've spoken about this for anyone. Remember this? The Pesach run? And they used an enzyme that was extracted from barley for Pesach, which was a really bad idea. And Rav Schachter was matir, like a multi-million-dollar cheese run. Mechatesi, it's barley. Barley is like chameshes mine dagan. It's barley, rye, oat, wheat, spelt. It's the B. Like what? How can you be matir? He said because there's a shach in your day, and the your day he says it's a eitz ba'alma, and it's eitz ba'alma ben eitz ba'alma. It was dried out, and he was matir. You have to know every shach and taz if you want to be a posek. This is why I don't want to be a posek. So that's what happened. Shiloshim Shu called Tzorkan. They actually did not know the fundamentals of psak, and therefore Rabbu Machlokes B'Yisrael. They said, I think the psak is X. Yeah, that's adorable. But you didn't learn every shach and taz. So something's wrong. By the way, I'm sounding maligning. These people, I'm just saying what in our modern parlance, how it would play out. It's people not knowing what they're talking about. V'na'ases, Torah, kishtei Toros. This is such a musar. We don't make halacha outside of the Dalet Kosle Beis HaMedrash. We don't make stuff up. We want to know if these light bulbs are mutter on Shabbos or not. These are probably fluorescents or CFLs. Is it like a light emitting diode where there's really no metal that's glowing like the old incandescents? So you got to go through the sugya. We don't make stuff up. It's not arbitrary. It's not how we feel. It's how halacha dictates. And if you don't do that, then it's ki'ilu na'ases Torah kishtei Toros. Big musar. Misham, then what happened? Kosvin v'sholchen b'chol mekomos. And then from the Sanhedrin Agadol, when they were looking to recruit, they read a job description. Kol mishu chacham, anyone who's wise, v'shafal berech, and who has a lowliness to them. V'das abrios nochem, and when people like them, hey, dayan, be iro. He should become a dayan. We're recruiting. Be the best. Misham, when there needed to be recruiting from the cities to Harabais, Ma'alin Osola Harabais. Misham Lazara, Misham Lishkas Hagazis, they would be promoted in an order. There was a pecking order, there was a growth ladder, as we talk about in our modern parlance. Shalchu mitam, they said out of Yerushalayim, they said, Ezu ben o ha'olam haba. This is for us. How do we become a ben olam haba? The Gemara says on the sun there should be a nivus ushval berech. You should have a lowliness. Shayif ayel, shayif v'nafik. When you come in, your head is lowered. When you go out, your head is lowered. The garis be'oraisa tadira. You're constantly learning Torah. V'lo machzik tivus alanafshe. And the fact that you're learning Torah and doing all these good things, you're not machzik tivus alanafshe that I'm so great. It reminds me of the tefillah we say in the morning. Lo lam yehei adam yirei shamayim ma'anu mechayenu. Umosar ha'adam min abema ayin ki akol havel. Even the Gerosa Talmud Chacham, we're close to cows. We're close to monkeys, right? We're very similar in our DNA, Yavu be Rabbanan enehon v'Rav Ula bar Abba. Everyone's like, yeah, that's like the guy in the corner in the base medrash who never gets up. They picked the guy. They knew who was the perfect dayan, and they picked him. Next, First of the very long lines on Peiches and Beis, Tanu Chazar Le'iro V'Shana. This was where the actual rubber hit the road for the Zaken Mamre, where he came back home after the Psak in Bezdin. Eino chayev ad sheyaseh kiho ra'aso, o sheyora le'acher v'yaseh kiho ra'aso. If he acts against the Psak of the Sanhedrin, and he performs what he thinks is right against Sanhedrin, or he teaches other people, that's the trigger moment. We spoke a little differently on Shabbos about this. On Shabbos, we said that it wasn't that way. In Shabbos, that's what the Mishnah says. This Brisa seems to say a little different. It says the Gemara, so I understand if you want to say that he's teaching others, and he's telling them to do like his psak. So I understand that this is the moment that he's now chayiv, because before he was teaching this psak, no one would be chayiv misa, but now he is. However, ela shiyaseh kehora'aso, if he's just keeping it himself, well, he kept that halacha before. Meikar nami bar ktalahu, because before he went to Bezdin, he was keeping what he thought the halacha was. Now, hatenach heicha deori b'chei lebedam. I could understand if you're not talking about a case of chiyuv misa, let's say when there's chenek, you're talking about dam and chelev, where the punishment there is not a chiyuv misa b'dei adam, but rather it's kares. The meikar lav bar ktalahu. Before you went to Bezdin, you had a chiyuv kares, but you weren't chayiv misa. The hashta bar ktalahu, and now you are a bar ktalahu. Ela heicha deori b'chei misos Bezdin. Let's say that the Zaken Mamre, he comes back to town and he was talking about something that he thought was mutter, that he could sleep with a woman where there's an Isser Kares. He thought you could eat in a unique scenario on Yom Kippur. So before he went to the Zaken Mamre, before he went through the whole rigmarole to become a Zaken Mamre, he was also Chayev Misa because he did a Din Chayev Misa. Meikar Nami Barktalu. So what do you mean in the Mishnah? Now he's going to be Eino Chayev Achi Yasek Yorah. So he already held that way. So the Gemara says, Meikara boy hasra, hashtalo boy hasra. Unique din in regards to Zaken Mamre, that when it came to the Isser that he was doing before, what he thought was mutter, but there he would have needed hasra. But now, after the Zaken Mamre rigamaru, no hasra required. This requires research. I wanted to look up the Rambam, but we assume that what happened in Bezdin functions as the need for hasra.
Doesn't he have to say afal pichein?
That is what he's doing when he opens his mouth.
No,
The afal pichein is.
Now he's saying, he's still saying, I think I'm right.
We
So
say,
normally you wouldn't be able to tell him,
we
when
say
he says,
that
I think
Hasra's-
I'm not doing something wrong.
That-
so
yeah,
there's two things.
yeah.
You said Hasra is only the Hakim Ben Shogeg Lamezid. I mean, he went through 3 batei.
It doesn't apply to a chaver even. The hasra
That
is
was the second thing
yeah.
I was going to say. And he's not a Chaver, he's a
No,
guy.
he's a mufla.
Mora Hara.
Yeah, he's
So
a mumcha.
I wonder if.
It's got to be a factor. Yeah.
Those two things.
But then why does he need hasra at all? Here, maybe that is what it means. What does it say here? The language was hashta lo boy hasra. Oh yeah. No hasra required. Or again, this is lamdus. Do we say that there's no hasra required, or he already got his hasra? Right, it's a lamdus. Okay, I could say lakan or lakan. I asks the Gemara Maseches the lo boy hasra Michael Amemar. This is a din we've learned already. We learned this a little bit earlier in the Masechta, where a Maseches, a person who is making others do avodah zarah, there's no hasra there either. So then, if I was being Maseches as the potential Zaken Mamre, I paskin that it's mutter to do this avodah zarah again for whatever reason, and then I go through the whole thing. I was already chayiv misa before I started because the Maseches is chayiv misa. So then, why then would this brisa make sense? Again, the brisa right at the first of the long lines says, "Eino chayiv ad sheyasek." What do you mean? You were already doing it before you went to Sanhedrin. So says the Gemara, Meikara, before you go to Bezdin, Omar Taima, if the Rav gave a svara as to why he thought that perhaps it should be mutter to do avodah zarah, in this case, mekablinan mineh, we're willing to listen to him to the point that we won't kill him, b'chenek. However, hashta, after he finishes the whole process of becoming a zaken mamre, Yomar Taima lo mekablinan mineh. No, I don't want to hear from you anymore. You've already gotten your psak. Dad said no. You're going to come downstairs and tell me now that I should go take money out of his wallet? Dad said no. Conversation's over. Before, it's an emergency. We listen to your svaras. Now we don't care anymore. So therefore, the Gemara is able to explain this brisa. Beautiful Gemara coming up, a well-known one. Chomer b'divrei sofrim b'divrei Torah. There's a stringency with halacha that is learned from the rabbis versus halacha that's expressed in the Torah. And here's an example. Ha'omer, if a zaken mamre says ain't tefillin kedei la'avor al divrei Torah, pater. Why? Because that is literally like black on white parchment mukaf kavil. Every kid knows that. That's obvious. Every kindergartner knows that. But chamesh totafos, that's not a din in chumash, right? That's a din in the Gemara, which is of course too many. So if the zaken mamri paskins chamesh totafos lahosif al divrei sofrim chayev. By the way, divrei sofrim doesn't mean that it's a din derabanan. Divrei sofrim means that the rabbis articulated the halacha that is the oraisa. Meaning it wasn't expressed in Chumash. It's a drasha, it's kal v'chomer, yud gimel midos shatorn dry. However, it was learned out. So then you'd be a zaken mamre. So if you say that there's no such thing as tefillin, you're a fool. you're a fool. But if you say that chamesh totafos, oh no, in this case I'm going to pass in chamesh. So that's when we have zaken mamre territory. Let's get into the Gemara. Amar Rebbe Lazar, Amar Rebbe Shaya, Enochayev Ella. Al davar sheikar midivrei Torah upirusha midivrei sofrim. As you may recall from Shabbos, we spent the whole Shabbos talking about Rav Meir. Rav Meir said that the din of zaken mamre only applies in a case where there's a shiur kares. Rav Yehuda held that zaken mamre applied where there's a din in Chumash that is clear, but the drasha is not present. We don't know how the halacha is built. Comes along the Gemara and says tefillin have to be black, tefillin have to have 4 totafos, right? That's the structure. So this is a Rabbi Yehuda the Gemara. And the Gemara says, when are you chayiv on zaken mamre? Only if there's a pasuk in Chumash, ikaru midivrei Torah, upirusha midivrei sofrim, and the explanation of that din is found in the Gemara by the rabbis, v'yesh bo lahosif, and it's theoretically possible to add to that iser, such as Bal Tosif, right, as we'll soon see, v'im hosif gorea, but by adding you ruin the din. The only case of zaken mamre is tefillin. This Gemara is like min hakatze el hakatze. It's unbelievable the breadth of the Tanoim in regards to how they understood. This should be zaken mamre. The scope of the sugya of zaken mamre it's not normal. Rav Meir holds it's only kares. Rabbi Yehuda holds it has to be a drasha. The third sheet that Reb Shimon held, it could be anything, even dikduke sofrim. Now we say only within Rabbi Yehuda and only tefillin. Okay, let's dig in. Ay v'ha'ika lulav. Well, why don't we have the same problem with lulav? De'ikar midivrei Torah, right? Check. We got that. Lulav means all this, not the esrog, but the hadassim, narabas, and lulav, that we have to put them all together. Upirusha medivrei sofrim, we would only know what a lulav looks like based on Chazal. We would never know from Chumash. V'yesh bo lahosif, and there's an iser that of adding another min. You want to add, a maple leaf. That doesn't count. And v'im hosif gorea. So why would you say that the only application of this din within the camp of Rabbi Yehuda is tefillin? Hooray! It could also be a lulav. Says the Gemara, the lulav my sfiralan. Oh, hold on. We got to get into the lamdas. Going back to Maseches Sukkah from years ago, 4 years ago. What did the Gemara say over there? It's a machlokas whether eged is a requirement or not. What does eged mean? Do I need to bind my 3 minim together, the hadassim, the aravos, and the lulav? And here is such a gorgeous svara. Says the Gemara, Isviralan, the lulav ein sarich eged. If you hold that the eged is not a requirement, then the fact that you're holding an extra min is not Bal Tosif, because they're all freestanding. That's not usher. It's just extra. It's not usher. And eged. And if you want to say that there is an isser of Bal Tosif by adding in a maple leaf, by adding in a rosemary branch, whatever you want to add in, you want to say that's okay. But then when did you have to add it? Before you tied it up, right? So now I take hadassim, a ravos, a lulav, and an olive branch from, right? Just a little thing that and then I'm ma'aged them. No, that's garua v'omedu. That was usher out of the gates. If you say there's a din of eged, that means that it's usher the moment you bind them together. That's not a case of Hosif Gorea, because you'd have to be Hosif onto an existing din. You can't be Hosif onto an existing din if you hold there's a din of Eged. Because when you close that Eged for the first time, that's when you create the model. So that can't be, says the Gemara. We can't say that lulav is going to be an example similar to tefillin. There we know a pasuk in Chumash and Parsha Shlach. We know about the mitzvah of tzitzis. Upi rusho medivrei sofrim. We only know that it's 4 strings. That's from Chazal. We know the 4 corners, arba kanfos. We know that from Chumash. But we don't know how many strings there are. We don't know how many knots to do. The Sfardim have their knots. The Ashkenazim have. Have you seen the different kinds of knots for tchelas? I mean, unbelievable breadth of what's going on. The only thing that matters, Ladina, possibly, is that first knot. And here's what the Gemara says. And v'yesh bo lehosi, if you can't add a 5th string, that's not allowed, or a 5th corner. V'im hosiv goreya. So look at this Gemara. B'tzitzis my svirulon. How do you hold in tzitzis? If you hold that the first knot, so you put in 4 strings, when they fold over and fall down, they become 8. That first knot that you tie, if you hold that knot is not the oraisa, and then you add a 5th string, who cares? They're all freestanding. That's not Baal Tosif, because they're not tied together. They're just sitting there. Okay, there's an extra string. I counted wrong. It's not Baal Tosif. They don't even have to be tied. According to this shita, our tzitzis could literally just have 4 very long strings that hang through the hole. It's impractical because they'll get pulled out. But Ladina, technically, it might work according to this shita. So that can't be what Rabbi Yehuda was talking about. And v'is svirlan, turning to the top of Peites Medalef, the kesher elyon de oraisa. And if you want to say that what makes the tzitzis kosher is putting the 4 strings in that become 8, and then tying that first knot, then when would the tzitzis ever become kosher? Only with the tying of the knot. And if you put a 5th string in there, that's not Baal Tosif. It's just puzzle. Because what makes it kosher is the knot plus 4 strings. You tied it, that's not Baal Tosif, because the tying is what Baal Tosif is. It exists, and then we add. It doesn't exist until you tie the knot. And if there's no 5th string, kosher. If there is a 5th string, there's no Baal Tosif. It's just not kosher. So that's also not like tefillin. Ihachi says, the Gemara, wait 1 second. Tefillin nami. The Gemara says, wait. If you have tefillin, obviously shel rosh. The shel yad has 1 parsha, and the tefillin shel rosh has 4 separate parshios. And of course, in both cases, this is a machlokes Rashi Rabbeinu Tam. What's the order of the 4 parshios? Very unique that people put on 2 pair of tefillin. We usually paskin and move, right? It's very rare that we do these kind. It happens. One other place we did this was by mezuzah, which is interesting. It's also parchment related. We split the shitas. Right? The Sfardim say it has to be vertical, and the Ashkenazim say it has to be horizontal, and we paskin to do it shalom bayis. We paskin to do it on an angle. They right. Because they have a Masorah. They know they're right. They know they're right. They got it. But the Ashkis, we don't really know what we're talking about. So we decided to do it for shalom. Yeah. It's interesting. I've just been in so many people's homes as a mo, and I found parshios that are pasha, not kosher, like paper, like laser paper, and like photocopied and not handwritten.
How are you?
What? The ones that are glass and see-through, you can tell when they're not parchment. The color's off, too white. You don't. I don't care how you bleach the parchment; it's going to have a yellow feel to it. So, like, if I feel that there's a Pesach, I'll tell them, and then I'll just send them. I'll call B'tzal or please overnight them a klaf, or if they're goyim, then they can't even put up the mezuzah. If only one of them's a yid, if they're a goy, it's very complicated. It's not so simple. Okay, anyways, the Gemara says, what about tefillin? Let's say I have 4 batim and I add a 5th. So then, this should be the same as the tzitzis without tying them and the lulav without a neged. And if you made it with 5, that's really how you would have to do it. It has to be 1 piece of leather. Very difficult to make tefillin, right? So then, garuva omedu. So it says the Gemara, you're 100% right. Great question. You're 100% right. It's quite similar to lulav and quite similar to tzitzis with 1 exception. And that is a very unique din, and this is quoted in the Rambam. and that is ha'amar Reb Zera beis chitzon she'eno roes ha'avir pasol. The outer walls of the four batim have to see the air, and therefore, if you add in a fifth one, it's bal tosif. And that's why tefillin, according to this shita, is the only example of zakein mamre. 1 in a million.
You've changed the whole surah.
There were 4. The 4 were kosher. You added a fifth. That's bal tosif. But that never happened with tzitzis, because with the tzitzis, it's not bal tosif to add a string if the only time they ever become a tzitzis is by tying the knot. If I add a string and they're never tied, they're freestanding strings. If I add a string and I don't tie the knot, they're freestanding. If I add a string and tie the knot, there's no bal tosif. They're just pasul out of the gates. It was never 4 and you added a fifth. The 4 only count once you tie the knot. So if you add a fifth in before you tie the knot, no big deal. When you tie the knot, it's not bal tosif, it's just pasul. But by tefillin, that's different. By tefillin, we have a din that Reb Zera says that the outer walls have to be exposed to air. So I made my tefillin with 4 batim, and then I slapped on a fifth, even though that would be pasul for other reasons, because it has to be part of the. This is all theoretical, because tefillin are not made that way. Tefillin are made; they have to be one piece. Our tefillin are one piece, and they are built like this. They're like built like this, and then we just make them look beautiful. The original tefillin looked horrible compared to what we have. Our tefillin are stunning compared to what they had in the desert. They dry out. What did they do from the time of Har Sinai until they could make tefillin for Klal Yisrael? What?
They did their best.
They did their best.
As square as they could.
Not just that. I'm just saying the timing. How did they fulfill the mitzvah of tefillin on day 1? They had no tefillin b'chlal. They had to shecht an animal. They had to dry out the parchment. They had to shape it. They had to make it. You have a mitkiyum d'oraisa. You have to write it. So either nisim or onis rachman patra. What are you supposed to do? Okay, that brings us to another Mishnah. Ein memisin oso lo bebezdin shebeiro v'lo bebezdin shebeyavne. You don't have a din of zakein mamre in your local bezdin, nor in the bezdin of Yavne, to where the Jews were exiled to after they left Yerushalayim. Elamalin oso le bezdin agadol shebYerushalayim. And you bring him up there. U'mishamer oso ada regel. He's in prison until the local holiday, the upcoming holiday, I should say. Umemisin oso biregel. He gets killed by the regel season. Why? Shenamar b'chol ha'am yishmeu v'yiro v'lo yizidun od. So that this person can be made as a sample. Stop messing with Bezdin. Stop. Nobody should be doing this. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Huda says, I disagree with you completely. Omer, ein me'anin es dino shelzeh. Look at this language. We don't torture the person who's in jail. Elamamisin osamiyad. How do we fulfill the din of v'chol ha'am yishmeu v'yirau? No problem. V'chosvin v'sholchin shluchin. You write letters. You put up, what are those things called? Pashkevilin? Huh? Yeah, the Pashkevilin. The guys who, you know those guys. You know them. So says the Gemara, and you do that b'chol ha'makomos, ish ploni mischayev misa bevezdin. So that way everybody knows what he did. No din of lashon hara, mutter, no problem, publicized, and that way that you fulfill the kiyum. This wasn't like a public policy of the bezdin that they should advertise. The pasuk says they had to advertise it. That's for sure mutter, but it's complex. All right, let's learn the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan. We're about 10, 12 lines down in the open of the Gemara. It is so late. We're not going to get to where we need to get to, but we will by the end of 2027. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, Eima Misan. So we just did this part. Here, that's the same Gemara again. That's right. The Gemara starts, Tanu Rabbanan, Eima Misan. So lo bebezdin shebeiro, lo bebezdin shebeyavne. There's no din of zakein mamre in a local bezdin or even in Yavne. El malan so the bezdin and gadosh b'Yerushalayim. Shaman asad a regular, keep him in jail until the next holiday. Misan so regular, he gets killed on the yontif. Shnamar b'chol mishmo v'yiro. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Yehuda. No. V'chinemar yiru. And then now we get into more lumdus. V'chinemar yiru v'yiru. The pasuk says v'chol ha'am yishmeu v'yiro. Not yiru v'yiru. We don't need them to visually see what's happening, like the executioner's hand. We don't need to see that. V'halo lo nemar ela yishmeu v'yiro. Lama me'inyan. Lama me'anin dino shalzeh. Thank you. Why would we torture this guy? Slight difference. This second one's more sophisticated than the first one. It's not just about ma'anin. It's that the pasuk doesn't require for them to see it. It only requires them to hear about it. Tanu Rabban. There are 4 scenarios, excuse me. Arba does not mean 3. There are 4 scenarios that require an announcement after a person is put to death. Hamesis, a person who promotes avodah zarah and was killed. Uben soreh remoreh, which again never happened. V'zaken mamre, which probably never happened if we hold tefillin, or of Rav Meir. Ve'edim zomimin, and edim zomimin as well. These all have to be advertised. Bekulu ksiv behu. In most of them it says bekulu, but it means in most of them it says bechol ha'am or bechol yisrael. But be'edim zomimin ksiv hanisharim. Why? And this I'm just telling you right now. I don't understand this. Delo kule alma chazu l'sahadusa, because not everyone is able to be an aid. Yeah, but not everyone's able to be a zaken mamre. You have to be a mumche. Not everyone's able to be a ben soreh or more. You have to fulfill certain halachos, and you can be a female. Not everyone is able to be. I guess everyone's able to be a masis. That's the only one that makes sense to me. But I don't understand this Gemara, and I didn't have time to look into it. You with me?
More, if you read Rashi, more than with you.
Oh, I probably read Rashi. What does he say?
There are people that are puzzle-aided.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw that. Yeah. I saw that. Yeah. Yeah, it's very. I don't understand the Gemara, and really what that means.
Events are possibilities anyway because it's a cotton, so don't really get it.
Don't know, and it's not just that the Gemara is difficult. That means that the pasuk is shver. Please excuse me, Hashem. I don't mean to be, but because the Gemara says that the language of Hanisharim was a change by the world of Edim Zomamin to teach us that there's a chiddush by Edim Zomamin that not everyone's shaykh to be an aid. Yeah, but not everyone's trying to be a zaken mamre either. So I don't understand. All right, let's go to the next chenek. We are halfway down at the new Mishnah. Navi hasheker hamisnabe. What is a navi sheker? That's a person who is hamisnabe mashelo shama umashelo ne'emar lo misasu bidei adam. If there's a navi, not really a navi, it's a navi sheker. But if he gives a prophecy, what he did not hear or what was not said to him, misasu bidei adam, gets killed down here. Aval hakovesh es nevuaso, someone who squashes his nevuah, v'amevater al divrei navi, someone who doesn't listen to the divrei navi, the navi sha'avar al divrei atzmo, and a navi who breaks his own nevuah that he got, misasu bidei shamayim, shenemar anochi edrosh me'imo, I will be dorish from them. I don't know how that pasuk explains everything we just learned, but that's what the pasuk says. Hamisnabe b'shem avodas kochavim. Someone thinks that they're a navi, and they say in the name of Baal Peor, in the name of this avodah zarah, that stone, that piece of wood. Ve'omer kach omra avodas kochavim. Afilu kiven es halacha. Even if they were right in the content that they said, they say in the name of Baal Peor that machzis hashekel is X amount of money, and they're right. So even if they were kiven es halacha, latame es atome, ulatar es ator, doesn't matter. You're still chayiv chenek. Stop quoting things in the name of avodah zarah. It's a really bad habit. More chenek stuff. Habal eish es ish. Kevan shenichnasa l'rishus habal l'nesuin. Once they go into the house of the husband, afal pi shelo nivala. Haba aleh reza b'chenek. It's not about her virginity. It's about the eish es ish piece. I was a little surprised that it wasn't after the wedding was over. It doesn't seem to be that that's the case, at least not exactly the case. But Eshes Ish should apply even by Kedushin, no? Does Eshes Ish apply by Kedushin?
Also,
So why are we talking about Nisuin? All right, I have 1,000 questions on today's Gemara. I don't know. Habo al Eshes Ish, we did that one. Chenek. V'zomeme afal pi shelo nivala haba aleh hareza b'chenek. We're 3 lines into the wide lines. V'zomeme bas kohen u'ba'ala. The Edim Zomamin who lied and said that there was a bas kohen who slept with a man. Shekol hamuzamin, in general, when there's Edim Zomamin, makdim la'osa misa, they get the same misa that they try to mete out to the innocent parties. Chutz mizomame bas kohen u'ba'ala. And in this case, what do they get? Chenek. What should they have gotten? Sreifa. Tanu Rabbanan. The rabbi, I guess we'll have to stop and we'll stop it in about 10 lines. Tanu Rabbanan. Shlosha misasan bidei adam. There are 3 whose deaths are by man. Ushlosh misasan bidei shamayim. This is kind of fleshing out our Mishnah. Misnabe mashelo shama. Someone who gives nevuah on something that they never heard. Umashelo ne'emar. Misnabe b'shem avodas kochavim. Those 3 I should say, are misasan bidei adam. Hakovesh es nevuaso v'hamavater al divrei navi v'navi she'avar al divrei atzmo misafsim midei shamayim. Someone who squashes the words of a navi a Navi who squashes his own Nebuah, we'll see soon, that's like Yonah ben Amittai, right? This famous story of Nineveh. And someone who ignores a Navi and a Navi who ignores his own, those are Misas and Midei Shemai. V'na'animili, where do we know this from? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rab. The Amar Kra, Ach hanavi asher yazid l'daber davar bishmi. Zeh hamisnabe ma shelo shama. This pasuk is saying that he didn't give testimony, right? That's what the pasuk says. Ach hanavi asher yazid l'daber davar bishmi. He was mazed, saying something that didn't happen. He heard from somewhere else. V'asher lo tzivisiv ha'lechaver tzivisiv. Zeh hamisnabe ma shelo nemar lo. So you have Navi number one who didn't hear it, but he was medayik from another Navi, and he said something not in the name of that Navi. He just said it as if it was his own. And 2/3 of the way down, 8 lines into the wide lines, Vashir the Berbeshem Elokim Acherim, Elohim Acherim, Zamisna Bebshem Vodas Kochavim. Uchsi V'Meisa Navi Hahu. In all of these cases, it says the Navi dies. V'chol Misa Ha'amura V'Torah Stam Eina Elechenek. HaKovesh Es Nubuah Sova Mavater Al Divrei Navi V'Navi Shavar Al Divrei Atzma Misasu Midei Shamayim. How do we know that it's from Shamayim? D'chsiv V'Ish Asher Lo Yishama Karibei Lo Yashmiya. The Karibe lo yishama el divorai. So these are drashas to help us flesh out two of these ideas. Uchsiv anochi edrosh me'imo. And what does that pasuk mean? That means bidei shamayim. Because that's anochi edrosh. Hashem will be the one who does it. So we'll have to stop here because it's already 9:30. I know it's a long shiur. Mirz Hashem will pick up tomorrow, and hopefully we'll get to finish this parak and begin one of the most fascinating prakim in Shas. Fair warning, we won't understand much of it, but we'll do our part.
Wow.
All right. We'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful night.